What kind of man slaps a pastor in public and still believes he's done nothing wrong? That's the question people kept asking. But the real story didn't begin with the slap. It began with a silence that stood tall, wore no anger, and carried a Bible pressed against his heart. It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon, just a regular Wednesday. Lunch rush was thinning at Gracie's home kitchen, the kind of southern diner where the walls held memories and the servers knew your order before you sat down. Outside, under the old ceiling fan on the porch, stood Pastor Isaiah Brooks, waiting for his ride, watching the police pin a young black boy against the wall. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene. He simply stepped forward and said, "Officer, he's just a boy. You don't need to hurt him." That was it. That's all it took. Officer Trent Maddox, red-faced, tense-jawed, the kind of man who worn a badge so long he thought it replaced his conscience, turned to the 67-year-old pastor and snapped, "Back off. I don't need a sermon." And before anyone could blink, his hand flew. The slap landed with the kind of sound that makes people freeze. Isaiah's glasses shattered. His Bible hit the pavement. He staggered, but he didn't fall. He looked up, his lip bleeding, but his eyes calm, unshaken. The boy screamed, "That's a pastor." A woman from the diner gasped. But Trent Maddox? He just adjusted his belt and smirked. He didn't know who he had just put his hands on, because Isaiah Brooks wasn't just a pastor. He was a man whose silence had more weight than most men's rage. A man who had sat across from governors and gang leaders, judges and grieving mothers. A man who had once stood behind federal bulletproof glass to expose corruption, so deep it almost swallowed a city. By the next morning, Officer Trent Maddox would be standing outside a chapel without his badge, without backup, and without a clue what to say, begging a man he tried to humiliate for something far harder to earn than forgiveness. But this story isn't just about a slap. It's about what happens when a man of peace becomes the center of a storm. Not because he fights back, but because he stands still. You're going to want to stay for this one. Trust me, the ending will change how you see silence. So make sure you watch till the end, subscribe, and tap the notification bell, because this story, like the truth, doesn't just unfold, it strikes. It was 1:24 p.m. when Isaiah Brooks first saw the boy. He was barely more than a silhouette at first, a lean frame in a navy blue hoodie, standing awkwardly beneath the crooked stop sign across from Gracie's home kitchen. His shoulders were hunched forward, eyes fixed on his shoes. His hands were hidden in his pockets, not out of defiance but of uncertainty. The kind of posture you wear when you've learned the world sees you as trouble before it ever knows your name. Isaiah had seen that posture too many times. He watched from the porch steps, the wind gently tugging at his coat, the worn edges of his Bible flapping against his side. He was waiting for Deacon Charles to finish his dialysis session across town. Wednesday was visit day. Gracie's was tradition. The boy, maybe 17, crossed the street slowly, head low. A sandwich wrapper blew past his feet. The moment he stepped near the cafe door, the squad car arrived. No sirens, no lights, just the sound of gravel under thick tires and the mechanical whir of power coming to a stop. The doors flung open like they'd been waiting for this moment. Two officers stepped out. One was Officer Linetti, younger, sharper, unsure of himself. The other was Officer Trent Maddox, stocky, sunburned, with a jaw locked like a vice and a mouth always half curled in disapproval. His boots hit the pavement with the confidence of a man who had never been challenged in his life. They didn't ask the boy his name. They didn't ask why he was there. They didn't even speak. Trent grabbed him by the wrist and slammed him chest first against the cafe's brick wall. The boy gasped, more from shock than pain. "Hands out of your pockets." Maddox barked. I didn't do anything, sir," the boy stammered. "I was just—" You fit the description. That phrase. Isaiah's stomach turned at the sound of it. How many young black boys had those three words pinned against concrete? How many lives rerouted by a description that never matched the soul it pursued? The boy winced as Trent forced his arms back, jerking one upward so violently that Isaiah heard the soft pop of a strained joint. It was enough. Enough for Isaiah to take a step forward. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply walked. The wooden boards of the porch creaked beneath his shoes. People inside the diner pressed faces to the window. A waitress mouthed the words, "That's Isaiah Brooks," to someone behind her. Isaiah stopped just a few feet from the officers. "Officer," he said softly, hands visible at his sides. "He's just a boy." Maddox didn't even look at him at first. He was too busy securing the cuffs. But then something about Isaiah's voice, its calmness, its weight, made him turn. "You need to step back," Maddox said, squinting. "I will," Isaiah replied. "Just let the boy explain." I said back off. Isaiah stood still. His face didn't harden. His tone didn't shift. It remained steady, like a pastor delivering a funeral eulogy with grace instead of rage. "I've been the boy," Isaiah said. "We both know what this is." He's not a threat, he's scared. Trent Maddox's lip curled. "I don't care who you are." "I didn't say you should," Isaiah answered, "but you should care what you're doing." Then it happened. A single step forward, barely an inch closer. That was all Isaiah took. And in that moment, whether it was ego, adrenaline, or the inherited poison of unchecked power, Officer Maddox swung. His open palm at Isaiah's face with sound that cracked through the street like a snapped bone. Isaiah staggered. The Bible dropped. His glasses flew into the gutter. And for a moment, time stopped. The boy, still cuffed, shouted, "He's a pastor. You just hit a pastor." But Isaiah said nothing. He bent down slowly, picked up the torn leather Bible from the ground, and held it to his chest like a shield. Blood pooled at the corner of his mouth. Still, his eyes didn't rage. They didn't scream. They didn't plead. They simply looked at Maddox and saw him. Maddox stepped back, suddenly aware that the crowd had grown. Cell phones were out now. Faces were twisted in disbelief. Even Officer Linetti looked shaken. "I warned him," Maddox muttered to no one in particular. "He moved at me." But the truth hung thick in the air, undeniable. Isaiah Brooks had moved the way rivers move, slowly, with purpose, to calm the fire before it spread. And now the fire had a new name. Isaiah turned, calmly walking back to the bench as though he hadn't just been struck in front of half the town. He sat down, pressed a handkerchief to his lip, closed his eyes. He didn't call the mayor. He didn't raise his voice. He just waited, because Isaiah Brooks knew something the officer didn't. Power doesn't come from volume. It doesn't come from the weight of a badge or the crack of a slap. It comes from what happens next. Isaiah didn't sleep that night. He never did when his heart felt this heavy. The room was quiet, too quiet. The clock on the wall ticked like a metronome for grief. Each second passed not with urgency, but with weight, like the walls themselves were measuring how long it would take for his soul to exhale. He sat by the window of his modest apartment, a single lamp casting soft light over a table strewn with prayer cards, worn notebooks, and old letters. A mug of tea, forgotten and cold, rested near his elbow. Outside, the streetlight hummed. His lip was still swollen. The slap hadn't been deep, but it had broken something invisible. Not bone, not skin, but dignity. Or perhaps memory. He had been slapped once before. Decades ago. In Alabama, 1967, he was 14. That time, it was a man in a sheriff's uniform. A man who called him boy in front of his mother and laughed after the blow landed. His mother had said nothing that day, just held him close and whispered, "Don't fight fire with fire, Isaiah. You outlive it. You outshine it. You make it wish it never touched you." He'd lived by that. But tonight, he didn't feel like shining. He felt hollow. And underneath the silence, something stirred. Not rage, but something colder. Something clearer. His phone vibrated. The screen lit up a name he hadn't seen in 3 years. Judge Evelyn March. He let it ring twice before answering. "Evelyn," he said softly. A pause. Then a voice, warm but brisk. "I heard." Isaiah sighed. "I figured you might. You okay?" He nodded, forgetting she couldn't see him. "I'm fine. Don't lie. You're bleeding in places you won't admit." He didn't reply. Evelyn March was one of the few who knew Isaiah beyond the pulpit. They had met long ago during a citywide reform hearing. He was a witness. She, a newly appointed circuit judge. Over the years, They had forged a quiet friendship based not on sentiment, but on the mutual burden of moral labor. When people came to her court broken, she sent them to him. "Do you want to press charges?" she asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because I don't need retribution. I need repair." Another silence, this one longer. "You're not going to let this go," she finally said. "No, but I'm not going to make a spectacle of it either." He reached for his Bible. The corner still bent from fall. His hand trembled, just barely. "There's a boy, Evelyn, maybe 17. Trent had him in cuffs when I stepped in. I don't even know his name. I want to know what happened to him. That's where I'll start." "I'll pull his file," she said without hesitation. And Isaiah, "Yes, you may not want retribution, but the city owes you more than silence." He smiled faintly. "Then let's start with truth." They hung up. Isaiah placed the phone down, folded his hands, and stared at the lamplight flickering across the wooden floor. Somewhere deep inside, a decision had been made, not with anger, not even with intention, just a quiet, immovable understanding. This wouldn't be buried. Morning arrived like a funeral march. Gray cloud hung low, and the air tasted like rain waiting for permission. Isaiah dressed slowly. Every motion was deliberate. He chose a charcoal suit with no pinstripes, a soft blue shirt, and a collar that carried the weight of his calling. He didn't wear his clergy robe. That was for sanctuary. Today was for something else. At 8:10 a.m., he stepped outside, umbrella in hand, and made his way to chapel, not to preach but to sit. The church was empty. He unlocked the doors, walked past the pews, and sat in the third row, same spot every morning since 2004. The chapel smelled of cedarwood and dust, the air thick with stillness and memory. He bowed his head not to pray but to listen. That's when he heard it, the sound of shoes dragging against the tile outside. Hesitant, sluggish, a kind of stumble that came not from injury, but from shame. The door creaked open. Isaiah didn't look. He waited. Then the voice came. "Pastor?" It was low, scratchy, unfamiliar in its humility. "Pastor Brooks." I didn't know where else to go. He looked up. Officer Trent Maddox stood just inside the doorway, but he was no longer the man from yesterday. His shoulders drooped. His shirt was wrinkled. No badge, no belt, just khakis and a pale button-up that didn't fit right. He looked like a man who had worn armor his whole life, only to wake one day and find it rusted off his skin. His lip twitched. His hands fidgeted. Isaiah said nothing. I lost everything this morning." Isaiah blinked slowly. They pulled me off active duty. Indefinite suspension. Internal review. Linetti reported the incident. I didn't even know he had a conscience. Still, Isaiah didn't speak. Maddox stepped forward, then stopped. His voice cracked. "I don't know why I did it. I mean, I do. He sank to the floor in the aisle, resting against the pew across from Isaiah. "I need help." Silence stretched between them like a long road. Isaiah studied the man. The brokenness was real, not a performance. But pain alone didn't excuse cruelty. Regret didn't undo humiliation. He finally spoke. "What was his name?" Maddox looked confused. "The boy," Isaiah clarified. "The one in the hoodie." "What was his name?" "Darius," Trent answered. "Darius Carter. 17. No record. He was just trying to get food." Isaiah's chest tightened. Trent looked up, his eyes rimmed with sleepless red. "I can't take back what I did. I've been wearing this badge so long. I forgot what a person's face looked like beneath fear. I saw yours yesterday and it's been haunting me." Isaiah leaned forward. "Then let it haunt you," he said gently. "But let it change you too." Maddox nodded slowly. "I want to make it right. I don't know how, but you start," Isaiah interrupted, "by sitting with the pain, not running from it, not silencing it, and not pretending you're the victim of it." Trent nodded again, this time more solemnly. Isaiah stood. "There's a meeting tonight," he said. "We sit with the young men in the community. Some of them were cuffed like Darius, some worse. Come sit with them, not to speak, just to listen. Trent looked up, stunned. Will they let me? That's not for me to decide, Isaiah replied. But the door will be open. He began walking toward the altar. Just before the chapel doors closed behind him, Isaiah paused. Trent, he said without turning back. Yes. If you're truly sorry, don't just beg for your job. Become someone who never deserved to lose it in the first place. Then he disappeared into the hallway, and Trent Maddox sat alone in a chapel full of silence, holding the weight of a single word: become. The community center on Sycamore Street was a forgotten building on most maps. Its paint peeled, the floors creaked, the water heater groaned like an old man. But every Thursday evening, the space came alive with stories most people in power never heard, because they never stayed long enough to listen. Isaiah Brooks had built it for this reason, not with bricks and mortar, but with relationships. One hand on a broken shoulder, one visit to a grieving mother, one quiet sit-down with the boys everyone had given up on. It wasn't fancy. It didn't have sponsors or spotlights. Just folding chairs, warm lights, and honest conversation. That night, the room smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner. A circle of chairs sat at the center. Coffee and weak tea rested on a nearby folding table. And the chairs were slowly being filled, not by politicians, not by preachers, but by survivors. Young men who bore wounds with no bandages. Some had visible scars. Others had quiet eyes that rarely blinked. Each had been stopped, questioned, cuffed, or worse, for no crime beyond walking the world in a skin some called threat. Isaiah greeted them one by one. No titles, no sermons, just first names and embraces. Good to see you, Quincy. You make it back from Atlanta. All right, Jalen? Ken, you eating enough? That was Isaiah's style. Not flashy, not loud, but present, always present. Then the door opened quietly. No one turned. Not at first, but when the figure stepped in, hands in his jacket, hat low, a wave of tension gripped the room like a breath being held. It was Trent Maddox. He didn't wear a uniform. Not anymore. Just plain clothes that didn't quite fit the setting. His eyes scanned the room, not in fear, but in humility. A man uncertain whether the floor would accept the weight of his guilt. He stood near the door. Isaiah gave him a brief nod. That was it. He didn't introduce him, didn't defend him, didn't explain. Instead, he began the session like always, with a question. What's one moment this week where you felt unseen? Silence. A long one. Then from the left, a voice. I was walking home from school, said Kian, a quiet 16-year-old with hands too big for sleeves. Got stopped again. Same cop as last time. I told him he already searched me last week. He said, maybe you got smarter since then. The room let out a soft breath. No laughter, just recognition. Jalen leaned forward. I went to a job interview. They told me I presented well, and then asked if I had any priors before even seeing my resume. Quincy shook his head. I was standing outside my grandma's porch, just standing, and some lady walked by and clutched her purse like I was about to snatch it. I was humming gospel. Man, gospel. Each voice peeled back a layer of weight they carried daily. Maddox said nothing. He kept his head bowed, but he didn't look away. He didn't walk out. Then Isaiah spoke. Darius. The name cut through the room. Some shifted in their chairs. Isaiah turned to a boy sitting farther back. Hood up, head low. It was him, the boy from Gracie's. Come up front, son. Darius looked around, unsure. The room was too quiet. It's all right. Isaiah said, this circle was made for you. The boy walked slowly, hands in his hoodie pockets. He sat beside Isaiah, eyes still fixed on the floor. What do you want to say? Isaiah asked. Darius hesitated. Then, with a voice soft and dry, he said, I wasn't stealing anything. Everyone waited. I know I looked like I was standing around. My shoes were dirty. My hoodie's old. But I wasn't doing anything. I was hungry. He swallowed. My mom's between jobs. She's got lupus. I went there because Gracie sometimes gives out sandwiches after 2. I'd been there twice before, and she always looked out. But I guess I guess I looked like the wrong kind of hungry yesterday. No one spoke. Darius's hand shook slightly. When the cop grabbed me, I didn't fight. I didn't even talk back. But he twisted my arm so hard, I couldn't move my fingers for hours. I wanted to cry, but I didn't want to look weak. Then he slapped that old man, Pastor Brooks. And that's when I got scared. 'Cause if someone like him can get hit, what does that mean for the rest of us? The words echoed. Isaiah gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Thank you for speaking," he said. "You didn't owe us that." Then, for the first time, he turned to the corner. Trent. Every eye turned. Maddox stood rigid. He didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice came low, slower than usual. I was trained to see threat in motion, movement, posture, hands in pockets, eyes that don't look you in the face. That's what they told us. That's what I believed. He looked at Darius. But I never saw the difference between fear and guilt. Never realized how similar they look when you're too proud to see the person. He took a breath. When I slapped Pastor Brooks, I didn't just hit a man. I hit the years he gave to the city. I hit every boy he helped keep out of jail. I hit the only person in that moment who was trying to keep things peaceful. And I did it because I mistook authority for worth. I thought the badge made me better. No one spoke. I was wrong. He looked around the room. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. I just want to understand. If you'll let me. The room didn't erupt into applause. There were no cheers, no tearful hugs. Just a long, heavy silence. And then, slowly Darius stood. He walked to Trent, looked up at him for a long moment, then nodded once, not as a pardon, but as an invitation to try again. That was all. Isaiah watched it unfold, his heart heavy, but full, because healing isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't come with banners or announcements. It comes in the form of a boy nodding at the man who hurt him. It comes in the shape of a circle, where once there were walls. Trent Maddox hadn't stepped into the precinct since the slap. Even after the call came, indefinite suspension pending review, he hadn't returned to clear out his locker. He couldn't. He wasn't ready to walk those halls, to feel those familiar walls watching him. But now, for days later, he stood in the back parking lot of the 6th District Station, staring at the dented blue door with its flickering sensor light, heart pounding like a fist inside his chest. The same badge that once made him feel like a gatekeeper now sat in his jacket pocket, cold and dull. He hadn't shined it since that day. He finally stepped inside. The hallway smelled like old coffee and steel polish. Bulletin boards still carried last month's shift calendar and a flyer for an officer retirement party he didn't attend. Nobody noticed him at first. A few rookies passed without eye contact. One older officer gave a slow, heavy glance but said nothing. The silence was worse than judgment. It was distance. He walked past the photos on the wall. Framed commendations, grinning officers shaking hands with mayors, snapshots of the department that liked to remember its triumphs and forget its stains. He had once been in one of those photos. Commendation for a drug bust in 2012. His picture had been moved. Locker 117 was near the end. His name still taped across the top in faded sharper. He opened it slowly. The smell hit first, sweat, leather, the sterile bite of uniform starch. His vest hung like a ghost. Belt looped perfectly on the hook. Boots below, clean but empty. And pinned to the inside of the door was a drawing. Something his daughter had given him 6 years ago. A stick figure in blue crayon with a smiley face and the words, "My hero." He stared at it longer than he meant to. He pulled the pin out, folded the drawing gently, and placed it in his wallet. Then he began packing. Folded the belt. Removed the vest. Stared at the holster. It was empty. It had been emptied the day after the incident. He could still feel the weight of the slap in his hand. Not the physical impact. He couldn't even recall that part clearly. But the aftermath. The weight wasn't in his wrist. It was in the look Isaiah Brooks gave him afterward. Calm, unbroken. As if Maddox had tried to crush granite with a feather. He sat on the bench and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He remembered his father's voice. "Respect the uniform, Trent. That patch is who you are." But that was the problem, wasn't it? He'd forgotten who he was beneath it. 2 miles across town, Isaiah sat in the small church library surrounded by shelves of old texts and creaking floorboards. Sunlight filtered in through stained glass, casting streaks of blue and red across his hands. He was reading, not scripture, but a report. Darius Carter. No criminal record. High school junior. GPA 3.4. Part-time dishwasher at Miller's Cafe. Mother, Cassandra Carter, unemployed. Father, deceased. Isaiah read it twice. Then again, he closed the folder and stared at the ceiling. People always assumed his strength came from prayer. But the truth was, his strength came from knowing the full story, from refusing to live on assumptions, from choosing to see, always to look deeper. It had saved lives. It had saved his life. And now it needed to save Darius's, because the boy was unraveling. Since the meeting, Darius had stopped answering calls. He hadn't come back to the center, hadn't been seen near Gracie's. Jalen said he'd started skipping school again. It was a pattern Isaiah knew too well. The spiral that comes after trauma, when shame becomes louder than hope. He stood slowly and grabbed his coat. If Darius wouldn't come to him, Isaiah would go to Darius. The Carter apartment was 2 floors above a corner store. A rusted staircase groaned under Isaiah's weight as he climbed. He knocked once, twice. The door opened halfway. A tired woman, thin and pale, stared out with wary eyes. Cassandra Carter. Late 30s, but looked older. "Yes," she said. "I'm Pastor Brooks," Isaiah said gently. "I work with the community center." Her eyes softened at the name. "You came to the hospital when my husband died," she said. Isaiah blinked. "James Carter. You're James's family." She nodded slowly. "You held my hand when they unplugged the machine. I never forgot that." Isaiah's voice grew warm. "Nor did I." She opened the door wider. Inside, the apartment was modest but clean. A photo of Darius and a man, likely James, sat on a chipped shelf above the television. Darius wasn't home, she explained. He'd gone out that morning. She didn't know where. He hadn't spoken much since that day. "I think he blames himself," she whispered, staring at the floor. "He keeps saying, if I hadn't gone out, if I hadn't looked the way I did, if I had just waited, like it's his fault that man hit you." Isaiah felt the weight in her words. "I'd like to speak to him when he's ready," he said. "But he should know no one blames him. Not me, not the Lord. And I don't want that boy to carry this like a stone in his chest." She nodded, voice tight. "He never got to grieve James properly. We never could afford counseling. He's been building this silence for years." That slap just cracked it open. Isaiah stayed for another hour, not preaching, just sitting, listening to the quiet grief of a mother who had run out of words and a boy who didn't know how to use his. That evening, Isaiah returned to the church just before sunset. He passed through the sanctuary, stopped by the altar, and lit a candle, not for the dead, but for the lost. He knelt, not to pray, but to reflect. Some things couldn't be undone, and maybe that was the point. Wounds could scar, but scars were proof of survival, of healing, of truth. As the flame flickered, he thought of Darius, of Trent, of how 2 lives could be changed by a single moment. Not because of what was done, but because of what came after. And for the first time in days, Isaiah allowed himself a smile. Because transformation isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It grows quietly, in the shadows between apologies and on the other side of silence. Wednesday came like a whisper. Rain had fallen softly all morning, coating the streets in a glistening silver sheen. The town moved slower when it rained. People spoke softer. Doors closed more gently. It was as if the weather itself understood the need for quiet. In the chapel office, Isaiah Brooks sat behind his old oak desk, surrounded by paper and silence. He was writing not a sermon, not a statement, but a letter, not one he planned to mail, not one he even expected to keep. It was a letter to himself, or rather, to the boy he used to be, the boy who had been slapped in front of his mother in Montgomery, Alabama, the boy who'd once believed dignity was something you had to earn by proving yourself worthy of decency. He wrote about how that boy had grown up believing silence was a strategy, how he'd learned to pick his battles like a man tiptoeing through fire, how he'd once mistaken peace for passivity, and how now, after all these years, he finally understood peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the refusal to hand pain the last word. He folded the letter and placed it inside his Bible. Then he stood, stretched slowly, and walked to the window. Outside, the rain had thinned into mist, and there, just beyond the iron gate, stood Trent Maddox, holding a book, soaked to the bone. Isaiah didn't move. He watched the man standing there, uncertain whether to approach, whether to speak. His face was pale, hair matted from the rain, but in his eyes was something different than the last time they'd met. It wasn't guilt. It was need, not for validation, but for instruction. The kind of need a child has when returning to a classroom after breaking something precious. Isaiah stepped outside. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar. Trent held the book out with shaking hands. I went to the library, he said, asked if they had any of your sermons. They didn't, so I found this instead. Isaiah took the book. It was old, Strength to Love by Dr. King. Its cover was frayed, pages soft with time. I read it in college, Trent said, voice low. Didn't mean much to me then. Meant everything this week. Isaiah studied the book in silence, then motioned to the bench beneath the chapel awning. They sat. Raindrops tapped gently against the shingles above. Trent spoke first. I thought about quitting, he said. The badge, the whole job. Isaiah didn't interrupt. But quitting's easy when you're ashamed. Staying is harder. Facing it, showing up in the places you've hurt. That's what's hard. He looked down at his hands. I didn't come today to ask for anything. Not forgiveness. Not grace. I came because I don't know what to do with the silence inside me. Isaiah let the moment hang in the air, then said, that silence? That's where the work begins. Trent nodded slowly. I used to walk into homes and talk like I knew what struggle was, he said. But I never listened. Never asked, never wondered what it felt like to live in a world where your presence is treated like a warning sign. Isaiah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You were trained to see danger, he said, but never taught to recognize humanity. Trent closed his eyes. The truth was sharp, but he didn't flinch. I want to change, he whispered. Isaiah looked at him, not with pity or distrust, but with quiet clarity. Then change how you show up. Start with presence, not power. He gestured toward the chapel. We meet again tonight. Not a circle this time. Just study, fellowship, food, no uniforms, no introductions. Just people. Trent hesitated. Will they let me in? They don't have to, Isaiah said. You do. A car horn echoed down the block. They both looked up. Rain still whispered around them. Before parting, Trent stood and reached into his jacket. He pulled out his badge, wrapped in a cloth. I'm not wearing it, he said. Not until I've earned the right to hold it with both hands. Isaiah didn't take it, just nodded. That's your decision to make. Just don't confuse holding it with hiding behind it. Trent left without another word. Isaiah sat for a while longer. He looked at the book again, then opened it. On the inside cover, someone had underlined a quote, Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. He closed the book softly, then stood and walked inside. That evening, the room beneath the chapel filled with the quiet sounds of community. It wasn't formal. Folding chairs were scattered across the basement floor. Old metal tables held trays of cornbread, baked chicken, rice, and greens. A few women from the congregation served food with the kind of joy that only comes from feeding others. No sign-in sheet, no program, just people arriving one by one, exchanging nods and soft laughter. Trent arrived just before 7. He didn't wear his usual jacket. He didn't try to hide his face. He just walked in, head bowed, and picked up a tray like everyone else. Darius was already seated near the back. He watched Trent quietly, spoon paused halfway to his mouth. Isaiah saw it, the moment of tension, but he didn't interfere. Instead, something unexpected happened. Darius stood, walked across the room, and placed a second fork on the seat beside him. An invitation. Trent took it. No words were exchanged. Just silence. Shared, not suffered. Isaiah stood in the corner, sipping tea, watching the moment unfold like the gentle breaking of a stone wall. He didn't smile. Not yet, because healing wasn't finished. But tonight, he'd seen something close to the beginning of it. A man choosing discomfort over denial. A boy choosing courage over fear. And a room choosing unity over memory. The following morning came with a cold wind that whispered through the streets like an old song. In the basement of the Carter apartment, beneath cracked ceiling tiles and humming pipes, Darius sat on a stool beside the washing machine, knees drawn to his chest. His hoodie was stretched thin, sleeves pulled over his fingers. The machine spun and clanked beside him, rhythm steady and low. His mother had left early for a community health program Isaiah had connected her to, something to help with groceries and medications. She didn't say much when she left, just kissed the top of his head the way she used to when he was little. Now, alone in the basement with a hum of water and soap, Darius sat in silence, but not the kind of silence that empties the room. This silence was full of questions, of memories, of a conversation he hadn't been able to stop replaying since last night. The folding chair, the extra fork, the way Officer Maddox, Trent, had sat down beside him and eaten in silence, not out of awkwardness, not out of shame, but with presence, like he'd accepted whatever response would come, even rejection, even anger. But Darius hadn't said anything, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how to. His father would have known. James Carter was the kind of man who could disarm a threat with a stare or stitch together dignity with nothing but words. He'd been a father in every room he entered, even the ones that tried to shrink him. Darius used to watch him pray over men twice his size, cradle crying neighbors in his arms, hug teachers at parent conferences just to let them know they were seen. And when he died, suddenly, unfairly, it was like the city exhaled something it hadn't realized it was holding. Since then, Darius hadn't sat in that chair, the big leather recliner, in the corner of a living room, the one that used to smell like aftershave and peppermint, his father's chair. After the funeral, his mother had dusted it, straightened the Afghan on top, and never touched it again. No one had. It was sacred ground. But today, on this cold, quiet morning, Darius stood, walked upstairs, and approached the chair. The living room was still. No TV, no music, just the sound of traffic somewhere far off and the creak of floorboards under his weight. He stood there for a long time, staring at it. Then slowly, almost apologetically, he sat. The leather was cool, the cushion molded to his frame, as if it had been waiting. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat. And as he sat, he imagined what his father might say if he were here. You don't owe your silence to anyone, son. Pain doesn't make you weak. Carrying it alone does. The measure of a man isn't how many people fear him. It's how many people feel safe around him. Darius leaned back. He wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet, but maybe he was ready to speak. Meanwhile, across town, Isaiah walked slowly through the chapel garden, where winter had begun to strip the color from the flowers. The rose bushes had curled inward. The soil had hardened, but the garden still held dignity. Dignity in rest, in waiting, in surviving. He paused near the wooden bench beneath the oak tree. This was where he'd spoken to James Carter the last time he saw him. They'd shared tea from an old thermos and discussed the future. James had been worried about Darius, how quiet he was becoming, how fast he was growing without guidance. I just want to make sure, James had said, that if something ever happens to me, he doesn't carry my silence like it was his burden. Isaiah had promised him then, if I'm still breathing, I'll carry him with you. And now that promise was more than memory. It was motion. Isaiah pulled out his phone and tapped a name he hadn't used in a while. Ms. Rena Caldwell. She answered on the second ring. Isaiah, she said with a warmth that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Rena, I need your help. Her chuckle was low and soft. That's usually how you open these calls. I want to bring someone into your circle. A young man, smart, gentle, shaken, and maybe ready. There was a pause on the line. You think he's carrying a calling? Isaiah smiled. I think he's carrying something. I want to give him a safe place to lay it down. Bring him. That afternoon, Isaiah knocked gently on the Carter door. Darius opened it. He didn't look away this time. His eyes met Isaiah's directly. And behind them, something new. Not anger. Not even hope. Just readiness. I sat in his chair today, Darius said without preamble. Isaiah understood. Good, he replied. They sat on the couch, and for the first time, Darius spoke freely. He told Isaiah about the slap, not the moment, but the after, the quiet walk home, the way his chest felt like it was caving in, how he'd spent hours in the basement just holding his breath. He spoke of his father, of the silence that grew louder each day James was gone, of how seeing someone hit a man like Isaiah shattered the last thread of order he thought the world had. Isaiah listened without moving. When Darius finished, Isaiah said softly, "Would you like to sit in another chair tomorrow?" Darius tilted his head. There's a woman named Rena. She leads a mentorship circle. Quiet, deep work. Not sermons. Just listening. Sharing. Leading. But it's not for everyone. It's for those willing to speak before they know what they'll say. Darius didn't respond right away. Then, okay. That night, Isaiah returned to the chapel and found a letter slipped beneath his office door. No name, just folded paper. He opened it. Inside, in rough handwriting, were 6 words. Thank you for letting me listen. And beneath it, a line of scripture scribbled in pencil. A soft answer turneth away wrath. Proverbs 15, verse 1. He didn't need a signature. He knew who it was from. And he didn't need an apology. He had a beginning. The room was smaller than Darius expected, tucked behind a red brick library near the edge of the South District. It didn't look like much from the outside. A glass door with smudged fingerprints. No sign. No welcome mat. Just an old intercom buzzer. And a woman's voice that said simply, "Come in, baby." Darius stepped through. The hallway smelled like lemon oil and old books. He followed the sound of voices, soft, low, rhythmic. Not preaching, not teaching, just speaking. When he reached the doorway, he stopped. Inside, 7 people sat in a circle of mismatched chairs. No robes, no titles, no judgment, just people. There were men and women, some older, some younger. One wore a janitor's uniform. Another had a bandaged wrist. The woman in the center, seated in a plush chair that leaned just slightly to one side, wore glasses on the tip of her nose and a scarf wrapped like a crown around her head. Ms. Rena Caldwell. She looked up, smiled like she'd known Darius for years, and patted the empty chair beside her. "You're right on time." He walked in, slowly. Every step felt like crossing a threshold, out of isolation, into something warmer. Rena didn't introduce him, didn't explain him, just said, "We're talking about the moment we stopped pretending we were okay." Darius sat. Silence followed. Then the man in the janitor uniform spoke. "I stopped pretending when I saw my reflection in the police cruiser window, and I didn't recognize the man staring back." A woman in a denim jacket nodded. "When I yelled at my daughter for knocking over a glass, not because I was mad, but because I've been holding in pain that had nowhere else to go." Rena didn't speak. Just listened. Then she turned to Darius. "What about you, baby? You don't have to say much. Just one moment, one truth." Darius looked down at his hands. Long fingers. Torn cuticle. He swallowed. "The slap?" he said finally. "Not because it hurt, but because it didn't surprise me." A few heads turned. I didn't feel fear, or even anger. Just confirmation. He paused. The weight of the words settled into the room. It was like the world showed its real face, and I just nodded. Like, yeah, that's what I thought. And I hated that. I hated that it didn't shock me. Rena leaned in slightly, her voice gentle. "Did you think you deserve it?" Darius blinked. "No, but I expected it. And now I can't stop wondering how long I've been expecting it. Someone across the room exhaled, sharp and soft, like they'd been holding it in two. Rena nodded. That's the kind of truth that reshapes a soul, baby. Not breaks it, reshapes it. Thank you. Darius didn't smile, but he sat back in his chair a little deeper. The room moved on. Others spoke. Stories unfolded like slow songs. One about a brother lost his system. One about a mother's love buried beneath her silence. One about a parole officer who once held a man's future in the casual flick of a pen. And in that small room, with no pulpit, no applause, and no performances, Darius began to unlearn the lie that silence was safer than truth. Meanwhile, across town, Isaiah returned to the hospital. He didn't like hospitals. They smelled like bleach and resignation. But he went anyway. He carried with him a paper bag filled with orange peels, a slice of sweet potato pie, and a worn paperback copy of The Fire Next Time. He was visiting someone who hadn't expected to see him, Officer Linetti. It was a short stay. Linetti had been in a minor car accident the day before. Nothing serious, but enough to land him in the ER. What surprised Isaiah was that no one from the department had come. The nurse at the desk said simply, "He's had no visitors." Isaiah stepped into the room. Linetti looked up, startled. "Pastor?" Isaiah smiled softly. "Didn't bring a sermon, just food." Linetti chuckled, then winced. "You're probably the last person I expected to see. And yet here I am." He sat beside the bed. They ate in near silence. Linetti took slow bites. Isaiah sipped tea from a thermos. Finally, Isaiah said, "You reported him." Linetti looked away. "I didn't mean to cause all this." "Didn't you?" Linetti hesitated. I didn't want it to become a thing." Isaiah tilted his head. "A thing? You know what I mean. Paperwork, disciplinary hearings, people taking sides." Isaiah set down his tea. "What side do you think I'm on?" Linetti fumbled. Obviously yours. Isaiah raised a hand gently. "I'm not asking you to pick sides. I'm asking if you believe the truth matters more than your comfort." Linetti looked down. "I didn't expect it to haunt me like this," he said. "But when I saw your face after and the way Darius flinched, I couldn't stop seeing it, even in the mirror." Isaiah nodded. "Then don't turn away from it. Let it change how you move through the world." A pause. Linetti whispered, "Do you think I'm a bad man?" Isaiah stood. "No, I think you're a man who's finally decided to see." He left the book on the windowsill and walked out. That night, Darius returned home and did something small, something quiet. He opened the kitchen drawer, pulled out his father's old notepad, the one he used to write shopping lists on, and flipped to a blank page. He began to write. Not poetry, not a statement, just questions. What does it mean to be seen? What if I don't want to forgive, but I don't want to hate either? What do I do with the anger that doesn't roar, just lingers? He wrote until the page filled, then folded it, tucked it into his hoodie pocket, and stepped outside. The stars were faint, clouded behind the city haze. But they were there, in a world that often moved too fast, too loud, and too indifferent. Tonight had been a small shift in a quiet corner of it. No applause, no headlines, just a boy with a notepad, and a man learning how to sit in a room without being a cop. It was Saturday morning, and Isaiah Brooks was polishing pews. No congregation, no choir rehearsal, just a steady rhythm of a cloth sliding across wood, his body moving with patient repetition. The chapel was empty, echoing with the soft creak of his steps, the occasional bird chirp from the open window, and the sound of the past brushing shoulders with the present. He did this often, not for show, not out of habit, but because he believed in preparing spaces long before anyone arrived to sit in them. Some men preached from pulpits. Isaiah polished pews and waited for people to feel safe enough to sit down. The front row was always hardest to clean, not because it was dirtier, but because it held the most weight. This was the row where grieving mothers wept, where addicts trembled through testimony, where children fidgeted with shoelaces during baptisms. It was also where Officer Maddox had once sat, head down, hands clenched, unsure if he even deserved to be there. Isaiah had seen a lot from that front row, and it never once lied. He finished the last bench, then stood back and surveyed the chapel. Morning light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colors on the floor like spilled hope. For a moment, Isaiah simply stood there, breathing it in. And then he heard it. 3 soft knocks on the chapel door. He walked over and opened it. There stood Trent Maddox, not in uniform, not in formal clothes, just jeans, a worn hoodie, and a nervous look that didn't belong to a man used control. In his hands, a folded envelope. "I didn't know where else to bring this," he said. Isaiah stepped aside, allowing him in without a word. They sat front row, side by side. Trent passed the envelope over with slow hands. "It's a letter to your congregation. I know I can't stand up there. I wouldn't ask for that, but I want them to know I'm not hiding." Isaiah nodded, slipping the letter into the inside pocket of his jacket. Trent stared at the altar. "It's strange," he said. "I used to think this was a place for people who had it all figured out. The clean ones, the good ones. Now I see it's the opposite." Isaiah didn't speak. Trent continued. "I've been going back through my reports. Past stops. Names I didn't bother to remember. I called someone I cuffed 3 years ago, man named Ellis." He shook his head. He remembered everything. I didn't even remember his face. He looked down, ashamed. I apologized. He didn't say it was okay. He just said, "Good. Now go do something with that." Isaiah finally spoke. That's how grace works. It's not a finish line. It's an assignment. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Isaiah asked softly, "Why now? Why come back again?" Trent exhaled. "Because this time, I don't want to feel better. I want to be better. And I'm learning those aren't the same thing." Isaiah smiled faintly, then said something he hadn't said to Trent before, not out of hesitance, but because he had waited for it to be true. "You're not the same man who stood in front of that diner." Trent blinked. "And you won't be the same man a year from now. The question is, can you carry both?" Trent nodded. "I'm trying." That afternoon, Isaiah walked to Carter apartment, a brown paper bag in one hand and a worn chessboard in the other. Cassandra opened the door, smiled, and waved him in. "He's on the balcony," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "He's been quiet today, but not in the bad way." Isaiah stepped out onto the small concrete balcony where Darius sat cross-legged, a pencil in one hand, a notebook in the other. The page was filled with messy scrawls, questions, doodles, lyrics. He looked up. "You ever play chess?" Isaiah asked, holding up the board. Darius nodded. "A little. My dad taught me." Isaiah set the board between them, unfolding it slowly. The pieces clinked softly as he placed them, white on one side, black on the other. Darius reached for a pawn. "You want white or black?" Isaiah chuckled. "I always let the other player choose. Gives me insight into how they see the world." Darius grinned faintly and pushed a black pawn forward. They played in silence for a few minutes. Then Isaiah said, "Trent came to the church today." Darius didn't look up, just moved a bishop. "I know." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "You know? I saw him outside before. Didn't say anything. Just watched him go in." Isaiah nodded slowly. "He's trying," he said. Darius paused, hand hovering over the night. "I know," he said again. "I don't know what that means yet, but I see it." They continued the game. After 20 minutes, Isaiah leaned back. "You ever think about mentoring?" Darius looked up. "Me? Why not? I don't even know what I'm doing half the time." Isaiah smiled. "That's why you'd be good at it. The best mentors don't have all the answers. They just know how to sit with people while they ask the questions." Darius looked away, out over the city. "Maybe," he said, "one day." Isaiah nodded, knowing better than to push. "Just think about it." They finished the game. Darius won. That evening, Isaiah stood before a small Wednesday fellowship group. He opened the letter Trent had given him, unfolded it, and read it aloud, not with ceremony, not with drama, but with a steady cadence of truth spoken in humility. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. He apologized not just for Slap, but for the years before it. Years of quiet assumptions, unchecked behavior, and absence in the moments that required presence. He ended it with a promise. not to erase what he'd done, but to build something better in its shadow. The room was silent. No applause, but no rejection either. Just nods. And that meant everything. Later, Isaiah returned to his study and sat at his desk. He pulled out a small wooden box filled with letters, some decades old, some written just months ago. Letters of pain, letters of thanks, letters from inmates, from mothers, from the forgotten. He added Trent's letter to the box, not to bury it, but to remember it, because redemption doesn't erase. It records, and then it teaches. The air inside the community center felt thicker than usual. It wasn't heat. The ceiling fan still spun with its rhythmic hum, pushing cool air in lazy circles. It wasn't noise either. There wasn't much of that. Only the occasional scrape of a chair being dragged across the tile floor or a plastic cup hitting the bottom of a trash bin. It was the weight of expectation. Unspoken, unconfirmed, but present. Tonight was different. Isaiah knew at the moment he walked through the door and saw the way the boys glanced sideways, murmured less, shifted in their seats with a kind of cautious energy. They'd heard the whispers. They knew who was coming. Trent Maddox was returning, not to observe, not to hide in the back, but to speak. Isaiah didn't announce it. He didn't prepare them. The space wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't a church. It was a sanctuary of wounds, stitched slowly by truth. The folding chairs had been arranged in a wide oval this time. No head, no leader seat. Just space for each story to matter equally. Darius sat on the far left, Jalen beside him, Quincy across the circle, and Isaiah quietly near the center. When Trent walked in, the room didn't gasp. It didn't tense up, but it shifted, like the way a forest hushes when a new animal steps into it. He was in plain clothes again, dark jeans, simple shirt, eyes down. Not out of shame this time, but out of respect. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He walked to the one empty chair at the edge of the circle, the seat at the end of the hall, and sat. No one spoke at first. Then Isaiah said simply, "Let's begin." He turned to the group. "We talk a lot in here about what we carry. Tonight, I'd like us to talk about something else. What happens when the person who caused the weight decides to carry part of it too?" He let the question hang. Darius glanced at Trent. He didn't look away. Jalen shifted forward in his seat. "Can they? Really?" Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "You tell me." "I mean," Jalen exhaled. "It's not just about saying sorry, right? It's about what comes after." Trent, for the first time, lifted his head. "I agree." Jalen nodded slowly. "Then I want to hear something. Not an apology. Something real. From you." Trent looked around the circle. These were not courtroom faces. These were the boys he had once driven past without really seeing. Boys he'd stopped, questioned, watched walk home from corners he didn't trust. He rubbed his palms against his jeans, then spoke. "I came tonight because I don't want to stay a visitor in the places I helped damage." His voice was steady. "I know what I did that day outside Gracie's wasn't beginning, and I know it wasn't isolated. I've spent the last few weeks going over every stop, every face I forgot, every decision I made with my eyes only half open." He swallowed. "I thought I was doing my job, but what I was really doing was surviving inside my own fear, and I dressed that fear in a badge." No one interrupted. "I believed I was protecting something, but I see now I wasn't protecting anyone. I was avoiding myself." He looked directly at Darius. "You didn't deserve what happened. Neither did your father. And I don't expect a single one of you to forgive me. What I'm asking for, if anything, is not to be let off the hook, but to be given a chance to show up anyway." The room stayed silent for several heartbeats. Then Quincy spoke. "My brother," he said, "did 5 months for a weed charge. Came back and couldn't sleep without a light on. Said he didn't feel like he existed anymore." He leaned forward. "Can you imagine that? Not feeling real unless the room is bright." Trent nodded once. "I can now." Darius finally spoke. "You can't undo what you did." "I know. You can't fix what it costs." "I know that too." Darius paused. "But you're still here. That counts for something." Isaiah watched carefully, his chest quietly rising and falling. Then Rena's voice echoed in his memory. True change doesn't ask to be accepted. It asks to be accountable. He stood. Let's end tonight with something new. He pointed to the whiteboard in the back of the room. Write one word. Just one. The kind of man you're trying to become. Not who you are, who you're becoming. They stood one by one. Jalen walked over first. Wrote, steady. Quincy followed, present. Darius stepped forward last. He paused longer than the others. Then wrote, unafraid. Finally, Trent walked to the board. He stood still for a long moment, marker in hand. Then wrote, responsible. He capped the marker. Sat back down. No one clapped. No one spoke. The board stayed up, a quiet monument. Later that evening, as the chairs were stacked and the lights dimmed, Darius stayed behind. Isaiah found him sitting near the window, notebook in his lap. Good session, Isaiah said, settling beside him. Darius nodded. I keep thinking about something my dad used to say. What's that? He said, you know a man by how he sits with his mistakes, not how he hides from them. Isaiah smiled. Your father was a wise man. Yeah, Darius said. He'd have liked this room. He closed his notebook and stood. I'll be back next week. Isaiah nodded. So will the seat. That night, Isaiah returned to the chapel. He stood alone in the center of the room, beneath the cross that cast long shadows under the moonlight bleeding through the stained glass. He didn't pray aloud. He just whispered, thank you for the ones who stay, even when it's hard. Then he sat on the front pew, closed his eyes, and listened. The hearing was held in the back room of a modest municipal building. Not a courtroom, not a stage, just four walls, a long table, and a few chairs that knew too many secrets. The air inside was dry. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. A clock ticked too loud against the silence. The kind of silence that happens when a city decides whether it will listen to itself. Isaiah Brooks sat on one side of the table, flanked by two community board members. Across from him sat Captain Ramirez, a city attorney, and Trent Maddox, the man who had slapped him, not in anger now, not in tension, but in reckoning. Trent wore no badge, no uniform, just a pressed shirt and eyes that looked far older than they had 6 weeks ago. This wasn't about reinstatement. He had already declined that. This wasn't about a legal trial. There had been no lawsuit. This was about something else entirely. Restitution that wasn't measured in dollars, but in truth. The board had requested Isaiah's statement. He hadn't prepared a speech. No pages, no podium, just memory and the weight of what had changed. He looked at Trent, then at the others. I came here today not because I want punishment, he began, but because I want remembrance. A pause. I want this moment, this slap, this silence, this shift, not to end in paperwork, but in policy, not in a headline, but in habit. He folded his hands. I have been called many things in my life. Pastor, father, community leader. But the most painful name I've ever been called was threat. Not because I was one, but because someone else decided I looked like one. His voice stayed even. We cannot build trust in our city until the people sworn and protected understand that fear is not justification. It's a mirror. If you look into it long enough and you still can't see the people you serve, you shouldn't wear the uniform. He looked directly at Trent. But this man, he did something rare. He sat in the circle. He listened when he wasn't the center. He walked into rooms where his name was a scar and chose to stay anyway. He turned back to the board. I don't speak these words to erase what was done. I speak them because what followed was more powerful than silence. He leaned forward slightly. Don't reinstate him. Don't punish him either. Instead, use his journey. Let him teach what he learned. Let him speak to cadets before they earn a badge. Let him walk into precincts not as an officer, but as a lesson, not to boast, but to warn. Another pause. This city doesn't need more enforcers. It needs mirrors, men willing to see their reflection before they act, and admit when they've been wrong. He stood slowly, his joints aching, but his spirit calm. I don't want revenge, he said quietly. I want prevention. He walked out of the room without looking back. 2 weeks later, a new program launched at the police training academy. It was called the Mirror Room. Each month, new recruits would sit for 3 sessions led not by officers, but by community voices. Formerly incarcerated men, mothers of the wrongfully accused, pastors, teenagers, survivors, and one former cop. Trent didn't stand at the front like an expert. He sat in the circle like everyone else. He told his story, from the slap to the silence, from the shame to the seat at the end of the hall. He didn't speak to be forgiven. He spoke to be useful. And as cadets listened, some uncomfortable, some skeptical, most quiet, Trent would always end with one line. Authority without empathy is a loaded weapon. So before you wear the badge, ask yourself, can you see the people you're about to serve? Meanwhile, Darius Carter walked into community center with a binder under his arm. It was Thursday, mentorship night. He had been asked to lead his first session, not because he had all the answers, but because he had the right questions. Inside the room were 5 middle school boys, restless, guarded, unfamiliar with the idea of someone listening to them without judgment. He didn't preach. He didn't perform. He asked, "What do people assume about you before you even speak?" Then he let them answer. He stayed after everyone else left, wiped down the chairs, closed the blinds, and for the first time, sat in a circle alone, not as a boy waiting to be understood, but as a young man ready to pass understanding on. That Sunday, Isaiah stood at the pulpit once again. He didn't mention the slap. He didn't mention the officer. He simply read one verse from Isaiah 61, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound. Then he looked across the congregation, at the faces he'd served, at the ones who had watched him fall, and more importantly, the ones who had watched him rise. He said, "The world will offer you power, but God offers you something stronger, purpose." And somewhere in the third row, Trent Maddox sat, not hiding, not erased, but becoming. This story is not about revenge. It's about reckoning. It's not about punishing the past. It's about choosing what we plant in its soil. Isaiah forgave, not because the pain disappeared, but because justice is bigger than anger. Darius healed, not because he forgot, but because he chose to speak. And Trent changed, not because he was forced, but because the silence became louder than his pride. Let this story be a mirror for all of us. If this story resonates with you, even in the quietest way, then it was meant for you. Like this video if you believe healing is possible, even after harm. Subscribe to this channel for more true stories that remind us what real justice looks like. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story that needs to be told. Because sometimes the most powerful moments are the ones that never go viral. Drop a comment below. What would you do if the pain you caused sat across from you and forgave you anyway? We will be reading your thoughts in the comments.